pick up where we left off last time by looking at more ways that the .NET framework has to help you with, I guess I'd say the design or the visual aspect of your page. I'm going to start out by showing an example of nested master pages. I have no idea why it did not work in class. If I was really interested, I'd go and watch the video and find out exactly what went wrong. But I went down yesterday in lab, worked through it, worked like a charm. So who knows what I was doing wrong.
It's the nose.
All right, let's take a look at the nested master pages. And again, and let's talk a little bit about the rationale of why you might use these. I'm going to play a second with the camera to see if we can get that. Oops. Happy medium on the zooming. Let's go with this. And there we go. Okay, let's open up the nested master pages and see what's going on with those. Why would you do this? Well, you would do this if you had a case where there was some content on every page, and then there were definite sections of your site that shared some content within the section, but not over the site in general. So, for example, we could look at LC's site and see an example of what I mean. Every page on the site has certain elements in common. Alright? Has this banner in common, has a search, has these three links, has these links. Maybe has this, I don't remember. But every page on the site has a certain number of elements in common. If we go then to, let's say, the academics division section, you'll notice that it still has the common stuff that's on every page, but as we move around, all the pages within the academic division section have this as well, have this area as well in common. So that lends itself to having sort of a nested master page approach. If we then go to somewhere else, for example, if we went to career services, again, same common stuff on every page, but everything within career service is going to have a different subnav over here. So within sections of the site, there's stuff in common, and then there's stuff in common over the entire site. That's where you would use nested subpages, or nested master pages, rather. You would have a main master page that would have the stuff that was uncommon on every single page. In this case, the banner, these links, the search, these links over, or this area over here. You then would have a master page that inherited from your main master page. That, for career services, would have the career service navigation. For the academic division section, would have the academics division submenu. And so on down the line, as many as you needed. All right, so let's take a look at how I did this. I went in and I simply created my first master page. And I was very bare bones about this, and I just put in just a header on this page that says, you know, this is a main master page. Main master page. When I created the submaster page, I went in, New, File, Master Page, and I select for creating the master page, I can select another master page. So I selected that one, and I selected the main master page. And then I was able to go in and put in a content placeholder in here. All right, which is what I did on my submaster page. I put a content placeholder in here. Then I went in and I made my actual content page a web form that used the submaster page as its master page. So now if we look at this page, there is the stuff that comes from the master page, the stuff that comes from the submaster page, and there is the stuff that's on the page itself. And I can run this, and again, you'll see all three sections. Everything is brought together by the server when it renders the web page, when it creates the web page. So the stuff from the main master page is combined with the stuff from the submaster page, which is combined with the page itself to give us this. I wouldn't expect for whatever lab you're working on, I forget the number of the lab, lab 5 I think, I wouldn't suspect you would need to do nested master pages for that lab. It's simple and straightforward enough that you should be able to get by with just one master page. For your project, it depends on your project. Depends completely on your project what, whether or not you would need that. In a way, each master page you can think of as sort of a wireframe. If you remember the wireframe diagrams that we developed in the CISS243 class, where as you have just a rough sketch out of that, you pretty much have a master page or a nested master page, depending on the nature of it, for each of your wireframes. All right, and then you fill in the blanks with the specific details of that page. Questions about this? All right, let's move onward and upward to talk about, first of all, let's go back and look at where we were in the other part of the example. Then we'll talk about the next things that we are going to do. So let me close this page. Open a new website. I just created a handful of pages that I had here, but what I had is I had on my master page, I had a heading, I had navigation. Actually, I had navigation two different ways. Remember, there's no need for you to do it two different ways. This is just illustrating different techniques that you can use. And then I have a content area. And the idea was that for every content page, it would have its own content area that you could put the stuff that was custom just to that page. But in this case, I've identified the stuff that is going to be in common, the stuff that's going to be shared from page to page, and that's going to be, in this case, the banner and the navigation. Now the nice thing is as we said before, is if you need to change something, you really only need to change it in one place. If I want to add something to the banner, I only need to add it to the master page. Likewise, if I want to add something to the navigation, and so on. All right, now we're going to take a little side trip, all right, in this journey to look at a sitemap XML file. And we're going to do that for a couple of reasons. It's neat how it works, so it's cool to see how this works. And it's useful. We're going to use this on the breadcrumbs on our page. And what do I mean by breadcrumbs? I think we also saw those on Elsie's page. These things up here are breadcrumbs. They essentially tell you how you got to where you are. And you can jump back and jump forward and, you know, it gives you a sense of where you fit within the larger site. I've heard someone say that good navigation will let you know where you are, where you've been, and where else you can go. Well, where you are involves having appropriate headings and titles on the pages, along with maybe breadcrumbs. Where you've been involves the use of breadcrumbs, and it also involves the use of using visited styles for links. Okay, you can set a CSS style for a visited link. All right, and where else you can go is just, again, the basic links in the navigation, and make sure that that's clear. Now, the sitemap file that we're going to create, we have to know how the pages relate to each other logically, right? In other words, I wish I didn't close that, but if you remember, it showed home page, academic divisions, business division. That's sort of the structure of that. If we went another level deep, there'd be another level added on there. We need to somehow represent what that structure is, all right? Otherwise, you know, are all the pages on the same level? Are all the pages, you know, is it a very flat hierarchy? You know? So we have to somehow define the structure of the site, and we have to define how the pages relate to each other in a hierarchy. And that's what we can do using the sitemap file. What we will also be able to do with the sitemap file is, instead of manually typing in these links, you know, we went into edit menu items and added the links. Instead of manually typing those in, we'll be able to bind the sitemap path file to the visual control. Now, binding is a real important concept, and as we move on to the next step of this process, which is integrating our pages with databases, binding is going to become critical. The whole notion of binding is this, all right? You have some data, you have the way that you want to display it, all right? So you have a data source that could come from a lot of different places. Primarily in this class, it's going to be coming from a database. But in this first example, it's not going to come from a database, it's going to come from the sitemap XML file, all right? So we have a source of data. Any piece of data we could display a bunch of different ways, right? Any set of data we could display a bunch of different ways, all right? Therefore, we have visual controls that take the data that we have in our data source and display it certain possible number of ways, right? Certain way. Now, one thing that we've talked about a lot in this class, and just in general in programming, in general in web development, is the notion of separating stuff into components. All right? This sort of carries through that philosophy. because we have our data and we have the way that it's going to be displayed. All right? We might use this sitemap data, for example, for 2 or 3 different things on our site. If we can have it cleanly separated where the data that represents our sitemap is stored in one place, we can then, by binding, display that data several different ways. And that's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to use, once we create the sitemap file, we're going to use it to create our breadcrumbs. That's one way of displaying the sitemap information. We're going to use it to display a menu, and we're going to use it on a tree view. So we're going to use it 3 different ways in this example. And the beauty is if we add a page to it, all we need to do is add the page to our sitemap file, and we don't need to update the display because the data is bound to the visual control. So if something about the data changes, that visual control automatically gets it. Now again, this is an important concept, and it will become more and more important as we get into database stuff, because that's exactly what we're going to do with database stuff. We're going to have visual controls, we're going to have data sources, and we bind them. When we bind them, what that does is that says, okay, this data we want to display this way. All right? So let's go in and let's create a sitemap file. File, new, file. And if you scroll down, there's a sitemap file. And click Add to create it. And notice what it did. If we go out and look on disk, it created a web.sitemap file, which it recognizes as an ASP.NET sitemap. What format is it? It is an XML file. All right. Someone tell me what an XML file is, what XML data is, and how we can use it. By someone, I meant someone in this class. Although if anyone walking by wants to contribute, I should leave the door open. They're welcome to pitch in as well. What's an XML file? What?
Isn't it like an extensive markup language?
Yeah, the letters XML stand for Extensible Markup Language. And markup language we should be familiar with from HTML. Markup language simply means we're going to use tags to indicate meaning. All right? Our tags are going to tell us what stuff means. Because really that's what HTML is, right? We have some text on our page. If we want that to be a link, we put that text inside an A tag. All right? If we want that text to be a heading, we put it in an H1, an H2, whatever. If we want that to be a member of a list, we put that as part of an LI tag. And so on and so on and so forth. Those tags tell the browser what that data means. And by extension then, the browser knows how to display different kinds of data. Well, that's HTML. And again, XHTML is simply HTML written to conform to the rules of XML. What is XML then? XML is simply a specification for defining formats of data using tags. It's probably a simplified description, but I think it will do. What kind of data can we represent in XML? Just about any kind we want. All right? It's often used to exchange data between organizations or applications or in other contexts. So, for example, let's say I am a book publisher, all right, and I want to send data to a bookstore about the books that I have coming out over the next month. All right? In the old days, there would sort of just be a proprietary format. In other words, the publisher would say, I'm sending you the data, and here's how it's formatted. The first 15 characters of a line are the author. The next 15 characters are the title, and so on and so on and so forth. Which meant that anyone who used that data would have to know and understand that format. All right? With XML, though, you define the data in a format that pretty much describes itself. This is sort of a self-describing data. So what we're going to do in the sitemap file is the developers of ASP.NET have created a sitemap file format. They've created what's called a schema for it. That's what we see this up here, a schema. And a schema is nothing more than a list of rules about what's valid in this file. All right? There is no Zeller's tag in this file. And it'll let me know that. Right? How did it know that? Because Zeller's isn't in the schema for a Microsoft sitemap file. So in the sitemap file, they define a set of rules about what constitutes valid tags and where those valid tags need to be. If I'm not mistaken, there's only 2 tags that are allowable in a Microsoft sitemap file, XML file. There's the sitemap tag itself, which is called the root node, right? Because if we collapse this, everything is underneath the sitemap tag. Everything's part of the sitemap tag. What would be like this in an HTML file? A tag that everything is inside.
Div.
Not a div.
Body.
Not a body. A
HTML.
table.
HTML.
It's the HTML tag, right? Because what do you have? You have one HTML tag at the beginning. You have an end HTML tag at the end. Everything on your web page is between those, right? Now, people were saying out other things like div and body. Now, you can have stuff inside that, but that's not the root node because that isn't the node in which everything is inside, all right? And that's the difference. You can have stuff inside other tags, but when I talk about the root, it's the main tag that everything is part of. And in the case of an HTML document, it would be the HTML tag. In the case of this, the sitemap, it's the sitemap tag. It's usually going to have a very clever name like that, right? Because it's sort of the head tag here, right? So the head tag in the sitemap file is the sitemap tag. You know, the head tag in a books file will probably be the books tag, right? Because that's what everything contained in that file is. All right. A rule of XML is that you can only have one root node. All right. Everything stems out from the root. If you were to visualize this as a tree. So I can't do this. Even though this is an allowable tag, I can't go in and say I got 2 of them. That's not allowable, right? Because there's only one root. I can even nest it in here somewhere. Because the rule is that there's only one sitemap tag per file. It's the root, and that's it. Again, this is the rule that the Microsoft developers came up when they defined the schema for these sitemap files. Any organization can identify a XML format for anything they want, anything that they're going to be exchanging or using data for in many applications. All right? but this is a schema that their applications use for keeping track of sitemap data. So we have our one root node. And there has to be one, has to be spelled like that, and there can only be one. Notice sitemap node is inside the sitemap tag. And notice that there's more than one sitemap node tag in there. Well, if you think about it, what is this? Well, the sitemap, yeah, there's only one of those. Underneath that tree, there's all the branches of that tree. For example, if you remember last time, we had our home page, right? We had a fun section and a no fun section. Underneath the fun section, we had hobbies and I forget what. Underneath the no fun section, we had some other pages as well. All right? And in each one of those, we could go further and further and further down. You know, my work history, if we wanted to, we could create separate pages for my career as a software developer versus my career as a teacher, right? And we could split it as far down as you want to go. So really, there's no limit, at least none that I'm aware of, for how many sitemap nodes you can have. Because that tree can grow as big as it needs to, all right? But it all comes down to one root. Now, there's also rules in the schema that says where you can nest things. All right, and in this case, I have to have underneath, directly underneath the sitemap node, all right, I'm sorry, directly underneath the sitemap tag, I have one sitemap node, and then underneath that, I can have as many as I want. So watch this. This is illegal. So why is that illegal? Well, the rules of the schema, again, say that directly underneath the sitemap, there can only be one sitemap node. And then underneath that sitemap node, there can be as many as you need. All right? So, sort of an interesting thing. Essentially what this is, what page do you suppose this is going to be on your site? Your home page, right? Because think of it, the home page is a page that everything else you can consider to be underneath. So you're only allowed to have one home page, one page on the very top level of your sitemap. So I'll go in, I'll put that in, I'll give the URL for it, which is default.aspx, all right, and title, I'll call it my home page. And I could give a description if I wanted to. Now, underneath the home page, what do we have? Well, let's look back at our example to refresh my memory. Underneath the home page, I had a fun and no fun. So I'm going to go and I'm going to put those in. Now, what does this mean at the end of a tag? It's self-closing. It's a short tag. It is a empty tag. I think there's a couple different ways it's said. This is a beginning and ending tag rolled into one. That's fine if there's nothing inside of this tag. But inside our fun and no fun section, there were stuff. So I have to get rid of that and actually put in the end sitemap node. And likewise with this one.